Presented by Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Welcome back to Championship Drive Rankings Reveal, presented by Capital One. Oftentimes, when you're splitting hairs, it comes down to style points. It appears that was the case with LSU jumping Ohio State in the overall rankings. Reese Davis earlier today spoke with committee chair Rob Mullins about just that.
Rob, let's start at the top. LSU overtakes Ohio State. Why?
Well, I mean, you got two complete teams, obviously. They've both added a conference championship. And when we're comparing schedule strength, you've got LSU 4-0 against teams in the top 13, Ohio State 5-0 against teams in the top 21. It was really close. I mean, we've spent the entire ranking season, the 6 weeks of just, one going above the other, just by a tick. And this week we saw, or the last couple of weeks, we've seen an LSU defense healthy and playing better, continued quality play out of Joe Burrow at the quarterback position. And this week we just felt that LSU deserved that number one seed going into the playoff.
Okay, Rob, I'm not asking you to give me names, but last week Ohio State was number one, and they had a solid victory too. How many voters on the committee changed their minds? Well, how different was the vote?
I don't get to see the exact vote, but, it was a similar debate that we've had every week. These teams have been extremely close. We've gone round and round each week, and we've shared that with you here on this show. But again, it's just one does something to move just above. One improves in an element to move just above. I think the key elements this week where the last couple of weeks we've seen an LSU defense that's healthy, playing solid, and you add to that an impressive win against a Georgia team that was our number 4 team last week, moved LSU that one last time just above Ohio State.
The perception has been, and look, selection is not reflective of performance. Who knows how the teams are going to play once the semifinals come in 3 weeks. The perception right now is, though, that 1 versus 2 was a massive deal because number 2 is going to have to play Clemson. How was that addressed in the committee room during the discussions?
That's really not addressed. Our job is to rank the best teams. And as you've seen every week, and we've spent considerable time talking about these teams, and they've been very close. And we've been measuring them at a very detailed level. And when you look at it again, when we're looking at the protocol, they're both conference champions. They both have similar schedule strength, so we're into a lot of other elements. And those elements are, we're talking about win against a number 5 or what was a number 4 Georgia team, a win against what was a number 8 Wisconsin team. You're evaluating offenses. Again, quality quarterback play, Joe Burrow a difference maker, Chase Young a difference maker. All those things are part of the conversation. And, it's been every week. And again, it's not somebody slipping back. It's somebody just doing something to move up above. And at the end, it was LSU number 1.
You've alluded to victories over ranked teams. When differentiating very narrow margins between the top 2, between LSU and Ohio State, what emphasis is placed on that as opposed to some of the other metrics, whether it be strength of record, whether it be a Sagarin, an FPI, a forward-looking measure? How would you describe just victories over teams that you guys wind up having ranked as opposed to some of the other mathematical-based, more objective measures?
Yeah, we're looking at full resumes. And when we're looking at those full resumes, obviously where teams are ranked pops off the screen at us. And that's why I mentioned schedule strength is a piece of that. And we know that LSU had 4 wins against teams that'll be in the top 13. Ohio State had 5 that'll be in the top 21. So we're comparing those very closely. It's an important element.
Rob Mullins with Reese Davis earlier today. I thought that what stood out to me, he says, one does something to move just ahead of the other. He cited the healthy defense of LSU and the win against Georgia. Greg, in your opinion, did Ohio State deserve to hang on to the number 1 spot?
They deserved it, but LSU also deserved to make their case for the number 1 spot. So I know it sounds like I'm straddling the fence, but had Ohio State been at 1, you would have heard no complaining from me. LSU being at 1, I think the committee got it right. That's how I would have had it, just based on how dominant they were in the final week of the season against a quality opponent that had only lost 1 game by 3 points. And granted, that game against South Carolina for Georgia, it's awful. But they had not been blown out like that in quite some time. For LSU to make such quick work in a pseudo-road environment in Atlanta, just 90 miles down the road from Athens, That was a remarkably dominant performance, and I think it eased the concern that the committee had about LSU's defense these last couple weeks.
Yeah, I look at it as two teams and which way they were trending. That's the way the committee looked at it, even though they won't say it. You had one team in LSU that started trending upwards because of their defense. You had another team in Ohio State that wasn't trending upwards because of their defense. And that's why they flip-flopped them, because when you watch not just the Wisconsin game, you can go back to the Michigan game that put almost 100. You go back to the Penn State game that they started to run the ball very well on Ohio State. And then you're saying, well, wait a minute. Did Ohio State peak too soon? Or are they really just not good? And when I say not that good, as in number one in the nation, not that good. So that's where the committee decided to flip-flop them. It makes sense.
Two things for me. One, the number 14. One team was down 14 at halftime and needed a massive comeback. One team was up 14 at halftime. There's a very big difference in that. And two, and Greg, you know this, I had Georgia. Do you have Georgia this year?
I did not have Georgia.
So I had Georgia twice this year. I know how ridiculously good their defense is.
Right.
No one had scored 21 on them all year. LSU did it relatively easily, right? So that is saying something, how good Georgia's defense is.
And they didn't have injuries on the defensive side.
Correct. And LSU did it handily. That has to, when you watch a team do that to a defense like that, you go, wow. They're literally doing something no one else in the country was able to do against them all year. So there's value in that.
Here I think the gripe, though, for Ohio State fans is that, hey, we just ran a 3-game gauntlet against Penn State, where LSU was playing Arkansas. And then we had to play Michigan, while LSU was playing a 7-5 Texas A&M team. And then they came into their championship setting.
Cry me a river.
I'm not
LSU
saying.
had to play Auburn.
I agree with
LSU then had to turn around and play Bama.
Ohio State fans right now will gripe and they'll say, look at the 3-game gauntlet that we just had to navigate through. Yeah, we came out of the gates a little slow against a good Wisconsin team. But you know what? Once we got everything figured out at halftime, we lit them up for 24 consecutive points.
You get no excuses, because LSU had to have the same or had a similar gauntlet when they were going through their schedule, and we knocked LSU for it, right? That was why we put LSU down to number 2, because we said, what happened to the defense here? Oh, we played so-and-so. We played Auburn. We played Alabama. We don't care. All we're telling you is what we see on the field, and what we saw was a defense giving up points.
Listen, if Ohio State's going to win the national championship, they were going to have to beat one of them anyway. And now they have the chance to be one of the best teams ever.
Right.
They got a chance to beat the 28-game win streak, Clemson, and then go beat an LSU team who some people think is the best SEC offense ever, right? And so if Ohio State and their fans and their team are as good as kind of we think they are, and even themselves think they are.
Well, I think the offense is. I'm still not sold on the defense. I think the offense definitely is. You know what? Let me rephrase that. The defense can cover very well. Yeah. They play cat coverage as good as anybody in the league.
Okay.
When it talks about toughness, though, if someone really decides if DeAndre Swift were healthy in that Georgia game and decide we're going to barrel down and we're going to run it north and south for 3 quarters and then see what happens in the fourth, I don't think LSU. I'm talking about LSU's defense. I don't think they hold up.
And maybe pressuring the quarterback. I want to dig a little bit deeper.
Checks in the mail from Coach O and Dave Aranda, because they're feeding off of some of those questions.
Great, because I want to see it. That's my whole point. I want to turn the film and be like, wow, these athletes are as good as advertised. I want to see it.
I hear you.
Film a little bulletin board material here. I want to just take a step back, though, and dig a little bit deeper, Dan, into the season that LSU has had, right? The reformation of Joe Burrow as a quarterback and the Heisman Trophy winner in a matter of days, right? The perfect season, the way that they had to beat teams, the schedule that they had. How do we digest exactly what we saw from LSU over the past 13 games?
The biggest thing is a coach comes in and sets cultures, right? Like Coach O has set a culture at LSU. It goes to the next level when your best player becomes your hardest worker and then applies the culture. Joe Burrow did that. And I said this morning, the most fascinating thing about Joe Burrow is when you're a quarterback, to get those guys to truly believe in you, and it doesn't necessarily matter what about your performance on the football field. Like the way you talk about yourself, the way you talk about your teammates, the way you pick them up, the way you love on them, the way you work, the way you show up, the way you compete. Joe Burrow did that. And I think that's what we saw at LSU this year was like all the kids on that football team looked at Joe Burrow and said, I will literally run through a wall for you. Like it became that. And I think that's why we saw the performance, not only at times dominance, but in moments, right? That mattered.
He's become an icon. And then you go with the Cajun spelling on the back of your jersey and you endear yourself. No question about it here. Much more, of course, on that game, both semifinal games. But, of course, a lot of other bowl games revealed today. We're going to dig into the matchup in Pasadena in just a bit. Plus, the Sugar Bowl inside Mercedes-Benz Superdome. It's all coming up.